Hello fellow space engineers, this is Marcelo from ACFM and Gaming, and today we want to talk about land vehicles. And we're gonna talk a little bit of theory, usage, practicality of them. And let's begin with let's have a few disclaimers. The first one is that these vehicles are designed keeping in mind a few maxims from how space engineers games take place, especially in public servers. Taking into account what we have always said, that the most valuable resource are players. So most of these vehicles are meant to be driven by one or two people at the most. So that being said, along this video we're going to talk about wheels, how they're behaving, possible fixes to that. So anyway, without any further delay, let's begin. So first off, the classification system that I have been working on was suggested by some of my friends, and basically we have two big categories. One is rovers, and the other one are crawlers or landships, or massive land cruisers, however you want to call them, the ones that are supposed to be tracked vehicles. Now the main reason for that has to do with usage. Uh, Basically rovers or wheeled vehicles, they tend to be more utility. They tend to be also faster. I mean, they can go faster because those wheels afford them the luxury of getting some air and not just crunching completely into the voxels. And also they are generally lighter in weight because of the purpose that they're built from. So I have two subcategories for that: the ones that I call standard rovers, and the ones that I call macro rovers. Now, the term macro was suggested by our friend Saukonen when he was building this Doom Crusher gigantic buggy that I'm going to talk about in a moment. Okay, the first entry, at least in this fleet that we're building, is the Jackal. The Jackal is originally designed by our friend Seth. It has a few mods to make it, more sleeker, to, work around the whole collision box issue with the seats. Now, this is the vehicle that is, let's say, perhaps the closest to a real-world vehicle when it comes to size. It uses 3x3 wheels, which are not the most stable for small grids, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So this vehicle is meant to be the bare bones entry level vehicle that you could use as a player, or if you design a scenario, or if you are playing a, let's say, self-imposed limitation scenario. This could be the starter vehicle in which you don't have any tools, no conveyoring system. You access the utilities manually by looking at them and clicking on them. Also, it doesn't have any kind of life support system. It does have scripts though, and it's really fun to play with. We have been using this in Escape from Mars, my brother and my friends and me, and it's really fun to drive around and look at the other person next to you, and they call out targets and bearings using Whip's compass. It's, like I said, like those scenarios in which you create the story and you impose the limits tend to be the more fun. Okay, now the next one up is a size of vehicle that I have found to be perhaps the more comfortable as small grids go. It's a larger small grid. I haven't have a name for it. It's classified as an LAV, partially referencing the game Deserts of Karak, in which you have LAVs that have the proportions of a Doom buggy, but the size of a monster truck. And that's also one key aspect that I would like to discuss here: the difference between proportion and size. So basically, you can scale up the same proportions of a vehicle, and that's really relatively easy to do in Space Engineers, just switching to small grid to large grid. And then there's inherent benefits from going to large grid, but there's also the fact that small grid tend to be cheaper. Now, what I was saying before about wheels, the at this point in the game, the ideal wheel to use on small grids is the 5x5. And as you can see here, it's taller than the character. This wheel, for some reason, I assume is the hitbox, also the power and the way the physics, I don't know, it behaves with the physics. They tend to be more stable, and also they are wider, and they that kind of prevents tilting a little. You still have to use at least, this is all prior to that really awaited wheel update, but it still uses gyros to compensate for that. So in any case, what I was talking about is that this size of vehicle, it has room for more utilities, and you can configure this bay here to put a large cargo container and do all sorts of things with it. And not only that, it also has enough room to have large conveying. It's generally more comfortable, and perhaps the more, let's say, useful feature that it has is the capacity to, house in life support systems. Now, like I mentioned before, I was referencing Deserts of Karak because in that game, due to the lore or the universe that is designed in it, the desert on that planet is a really harsh place. So basically, you need a larger vehicle. You cannot just get like, for example, a Humvee. If you start putting, the oxygen, the environment control, like I guess, like the extra cooling that they need because that's a mechanic in that game, the whole overheating, especially for the carrier. So you would end up with a bigger vehicle because you basically just need to put more equipment into it. And that is true also for space engineers. I mean, if you go to a Terran planet in which you don't have to, worry for breathing without a helmet, then you just use a regular car like this. But if you go to an alien planet or one that doesn't have the same atmosphere or composition, then you definitely need something that is going to be a bit larger. Now, moving on, and on the topic of a scaling up, we have the Macro Rover. And the Doom Crusher, like I mentioned before, was designed originally by our friend Seukonen, and he had this clever idea to use the casemat from the OKI weapons mod that does have, some rotation and elevation to it on a cone, and he put it on this player-made turret to give it full 360 degrees of rotation. And it does have enough elevation, to clear that slant and shoot like relatively, let's say, up to here. And also for support and anti-air, it has a single 23mm. Now this could be remake in vanilla, perhaps with a full-on vanilla turret, but I really like the way it looks. And so I took this design and I decided to put some of the tricks that I have learned from other space engineers, like especially High Ground, who's really, let's say, talented in putting inside of a tiny hole all of the utilities that you need. And as, let's say, survival on a planet goes, this has all you need. It even has 2 arc furnaces. So this would be, in essence, a good starting ship. So, for example, if somebody designs in a scenario in which you're going to have rovers or starting ships, you can begin with this. So you can process the basic ores and take it from there. Maybe do some salvaging and then building a refinery and moving on. Now, one thing that I would like to ask you is, do you see any use in combat for the ship? Because it suffers from, let's say, the same weaknesses that a small, large grid corvettes or gunboats have, in the way that they're really brittle. All of the non-deformable blocks that contain some, sort of component are directly touching the exterior hull, are directly touching the skin. And if for example, if you want to armor a ship in Space Engineers, you have to use outward facing or inward facing slants, so there's no direct contact, with the deformable armor and the, let's say, cargo containers, so they can burst by damage transfer or deformation damage. So you cannot do that with this size of ship. or rover in this case. So they might be a little bit brittle, but maybe against smaller cars they could dominate. So anyway, the let's say the kind of like background that I gave to this car, and that like Saucon was talking about also, is that it's a long range scout. So, and it can house one crew member for a long period of time, or two crew members for a long period of time, and have all you need, processing ice and stuff like that. So then we move to the MCV, the mobile construction vehicle that I was talking in my previous video. And this is of course has the same dimensions, and well, not dimensions but proportions of the base runner from Deserts of Karak. It does have the same functionality, but as proportion goes, it's in essence a 5-ton truck that is just scaled up. It has a back section with 4 wheels in it that is meant to carry a lot of weight. So it has a refinery there, and its own mini garage for smaller rovers and such. And then let's say the other utilities or the other useful blocks are in tandem or zigzagging on the top to allow for them to coexist in this smaller space. Because like I said before, if we were to put them all in line or symmetrical, they would just they wouldn't fit. So this is one step up from this. It could also be used as a starter ship, or as the thing that you land on a planet and you begin a base. If you have like a large dropship, you could even build it in a space and then carry it down, or drop it with some hydrogen thrusters or something like that. Or maybe a lot of parachutes whenever they release that. So in any case, not to digress, this is the one that is going to enable to then expand and build more smaller vehicles. Or like I mentioned in the description of these, some of defense turrets like these ones here, and I'll make a separate video about this, so no rush. So that's all for the category of rovers. So as you can see, they are light escort and support vehicles mostly. Then we move to the next category, which is landships. And like you have noticed that I skipped tanks, and that's another one of the questions that I want to ask you as viewers, as community members, is what do you think about tanks in Space Engineers? There is like conflicting opinions about it. I honestly cannot make up my mind if if we can actually call vehicles that look like tanks tanks, because they really don't behave like them, especially because there's no armor penetration mechanic. The armor is there, the whole durability thing, but there's no way to defeat it besides pounding it with a lot of things or just using collisions to destroy them. So maybe in a way that's its own way of armor penetration. So in any case, I don't want to digress too much on the need to have different damage types in this game. So let's talk about landships or macro tanks or large tanks. I have two here of my own creation. The Leopard, which is an assault gun meant to, direct fire against entrenched positions, and it has this Gatling turret. This is the vanilla version of it, specializing in more, differentiating it more from the bigger Lion over there. Now, these vehicles use a suspension system designed by Bruce Little Lee in his Prospector Miner, and it has to be noted that while they don't work now, hopefully they will be back in working order after Keen releases the Wheels update, and that this suspension system, despite any doubts that some people have manifested, it works really well. It's perhaps the most stable suspension that you're ever gonna find. Like I said, in this current state, maybe in the future it wouldn't be that different from the upgraded wheels that are going to be more stable. But right now, for example, the Lion here is nearly impossible to turn over because of its mass and the way it spreads out low on the ground. The Leopard is lighter, and yes, you can flip it. You don't even have to try too hard. So in any case, we're talking about low to the ground, armored, mobile, able to clear obstacles, and heavy firepower. Those are characteristics that I believe define a tank. I am by no means an armor expert, so please feel free to correct me on that. But for gameplay purposes in this game, that's what you would like to call a tank in Space Engineers. And this is, let's say, my proposal. It's a macro tank because, anything that is a small grid, even if it's just looked the wrong way by a rocket, it's just gonna completely disappear. So you may make a tank that looks, or a vehicle that looks like a tank in a small grid, but you're not gonna get that, um, you know, armored characteristic out of it. So these ones do take a lot of punishment, and due to the nature of this suspension, they can actually lose some of the front wheels and, still clear obstacles. I wish I could show it to you, but I didn't record that way back in the day. But it is surprisingly stable. So let's give you a quick tour of the new version of the Lion, because I'm still working on the Leopard. Again, like all of the other vehicles that I like to build, it has, the utilities accessible by the player, the oxygen generator, cargo, stores. If you remove some of these panels, you have direct access to the magazines for the main guns. And yes, this one is modded, and it's gonna stay modded because honestly, putting rocket turrets on a tank, that's just, just not. So again, interior access for repairing in case you wanna weld stuff, or reload manually in case you have some damage to the conveying system. Now this reworked interior has a med bay to spawn in, built-in programming block, and then I'm gonna have to add one of those rotor tricked dashboards to be able to have more programs in it. And this is the newest feature, kind of like a commander's cupola with some of the slits. You can barely see something out of the tank, but at least you're not fully blind if you go in a full, hardcore 1x survival game. So you do have some exterior view, and the idea is that you look out from the turrets, and you have plenty of turrets, to look out from. So you have 6 turrets in total, and they cover every possible angle of the landship. So if you lose one, you can still drive the vehicle from the other. Well, that is all for now. I want to hear your thoughts, your suggestions, how to improve these vehicles, how do you build your vehicles, and what do you expect to see or to do in game when the Wheels update hits us. Take care and keep playing.